Tarpley.net. I'm going to recommend two books. Let me just get ahead of myself here. I really want you to get, if you haven't read Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, you ought to get that, because it basically, in January and February and March of 2008, during the primaries, I was pointing out that the Obama regime is going to go to a confrontation with Russia. And here I have, Trilateral Commission co-founder Brzezinski wants a global showdown with Russia and China, far more dangerous for the United States than the Bush-Cheney Iraq adventure. Yeah, and now you've got it. So, once again, prophetic, if I do say so myself. I know what's going on in the world, and there's one piece of proof. And then, for the Cloven Bundy issue, I want you to get, if you haven't got it, Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. And we know we've got Cloven on subversion. Whether we've got him on theocracy, I don't know. And the interesting one is, can we get Cloven on polygamy, which I think is the issue on the table, so to speak. Now, the situation, therefore, I have to ask once again, are we in July 1914? Are we in that kind of dream time that is reported by so many writers, right, by Arnold Zweig, or Stefan Zweig, sorry, and Roger Martin Dugard, Nobel Prize winner in the 30s, that dreamlike unreality of July 1914. If I get a chance to dip into these books again, I will try to report on them, but you get the idea. You look at these self-satisfied, priggish, other-directed so-called intellectuals, pundits, whatever they are, spouting this absolute nonsense. And they have to do it because they're tied to Kerry and the idiocy that he puts out, and Biden and Obama, of course, since those are the speeches that he reads. Are we in July 1914? Now, one promising aspect of this situation, and I mentioned this briefly last week, let's try to go into a little bit more, and we're going to be talking about this week to week. The question of globalization. Remember that globalization is simply a kind of euphemism, or it's the term for the American empire of the post-1991 era. In other words, it's not the U.S. empire of 1955 or 1965 or 70, whatever it is. It's specifically post-1991. It's the time of unipolarity. It is the time when Russia, to a significant degree because of their own mistakes, don't forget that, but also because, of course, tremendous economic warfare, encirclement, COCOM list, technology boycott, and everything else, coming from the West, from the U.S., and maintained to the present day, that the Soviet Union collapsed, right? The Warsaw Pact broke up, the Soviet Union broke up, and what you're left with now is the Russian Federation. And this was brought to you by the incompetence and the corruption and the venality of people like Gorbachev, Yeltsin, Chubais, Yegor Gaidar, and on and on. So we have unipolarity. And the name of the unipolarity, instead of calling it the unipolar empire, it's called globalization. Now, one of our principal tasks, as listeners know, is to put an end to this period of globalization. It has been not just politically suffocating, but economically bad for the world, very bad. And could it be brought to an end? Well, I begin to see possibilities. The news this week is that the Russian credit rating on Russian government bonds has been cut to one notch, as they say, above junk status. And this is Standard & Poor's has cut Russia to virtual junk status. Now, there is, we have to remember, right, 1998, the GKO crisis, the Russian government bonds, there was a default of the Russian state in 1998, which put an end to the promises from Chubais, Gaidar, Kudrin, Nemtsov, all these people, the Union, now the Union of Right Forces, they were promising, the young reformers were promising singing tomorrows. Well, that ended in 1998 when all the Russians lost their savings accounts, which had already been destroyed in the hyperinflation of 1992. So with Russia, you're dealing with a country that's been wiped out twice in recent memory. 1992, hyperinflation of 1,200% wiped out savings accounts. 1998 did it again because the bank went bankrupt. So that is now the threat that is being brandished. The third time around, I would say don't do it. You get people very angry with that. And I won't go into the obvious parallels, but, 1923 certainly didn't improve the mood in Berlin, and another round of this stuff will not with Russia. But here's the idea. If the Wall Street finance oligarchs and associated predators insist on pushing their kept politicians down this road, sanctions, sector sanctions, and the attack, now you can see, an attack on the Russian currency and an attack on the Russian bonds, what will that do? It may be the beginning of the end of globalization. Because it's obvious what you do if you come under that kind of attack. You put up currency controls, you put up exchange controls, you put up capital controls, and with that, the endless blather of globalization goes out the window. And you have to think about forms of not even autarky, but creating a bloc. There, it's not clear whether it will hold up in whole or even in part, right? The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, it's there, at least nominally. How many of them are prepared to go with the West? If this character Modi wins in India, I am not optimistic about India under Modi, but some of the others, you can't tell. China in particular, right? They will have to make a decision, which normally they don't like to do, right? Those apparatchiki there in Beijing, but they're going to have to. And the question is, what are you going to do then? Russia has been forced to make these decisions. You remember that the entire strategy of the Russian oligarchy over the past 20 years has been to project an anti-Western ideology on the inside of the country and at the same time to attempt to integrate Russia into the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the OECD, and every other possible organization. Now, that may now come to a halt. Russia has been downgraded. Sector sanctions may be imminent. The beauty of Russia is that because of its size, because of its geopolitical position, because of its natural resources, because of its general importance, it has the ability alone, perhaps not to completely destroy the edifice of globalization, but to undermine it and to put such cracks in it that its survival will be brought into serious question. And we might say at this point that the mad dog ruling class of the Western world will have nobody but themselves to thank. You stage a coup d'etat in Kiev, and then when the Russian countermeasures begin, you start whining. It's ridiculous. And then your entire globalization system, under which you've all become rich, comes down. So that's your fault. Don't blame it on Moscow. Blame it on yourself. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. I think I mentioned last week that we had U.S. anti-tank missiles going to Syria. I think it's probably too little and too late. The best thing for Syria would be to have the hostilities cease without any further foreign intervention. But of course, we know apparently the division of labor is that the Qatar people pay for the terrorist death squads that come in through the rat line of Turkey, and Saudi Arabia is now focusing on terrorists coming in through the rat line of Jordan and the Jordanian camps, and training going on in the Jordanian camps to teach these the jihadis, these death squads, to use the anti-tank and perhaps anti-aircraft missiles that the U.S. is giving them. And I say again to Obama, the first airplane that goes down with one of those missiles is going to be the end of you, because your Republican friends will be delighted to impeach you for that, and the neocons will join in. But now, having gone through this entire situation with Ukraine. Oh, one other issue, right? One of the crosstalk episodes on Russia Today this week had to do with the vote to impeach, to oust Yanukovych from the presidency, and was this a legal vote? And there was one loudmouth American jerk on there who was claiming that this was legal. No, not legal. Legal is when Hitler drove the communists out of the Reichstag before voting the enabling laws, right? Because the communists would have voted against them. If you kick out, 100 members of the Reichstag, you can then get your majority. So Hitler's seizure of power was not legal, because he had purged the parliament in advance. And something similar went on in Kiev with the Rada. That is to say, the Ukrainian Rada was meeting under siege, in the sense that they were killers from the right sector and indeed from the Svoboda party outside, who they stood ready to liquidate members of parliament who did not vote for the impeachment of Yanukovych. So they were acting under duress. It's, again, very much like the attempt of the French fascists to take over the National Assembly in February 1934, right? The Stavisky affair, as it's often known. But in this case, the Rada had a gun to its head under duress. That vote is not valid. And even, or perhaps partially due to this fact, in order to impeach, my understanding of the Ukrainian constitution is you've got to get 2/3, maybe 3/4, but I think 2/3 of the parliament. That is to say, of the whole parliament, not of those voting, but of the entire number of deputies that exist. You got to get 2/3 of that. And precisely because of the heavy-handed stuff, quite a few people didn't show up. They were not going to vote to oust Yanukovych, so they stayed home or ran away. And then the measure fell short. It had a nice big majority, but it did not get the 2/3 that it needed. I think it got something like 338, and it needed something over 500, whatever it was. So it is illegal. The whole thing is illegal.